So I'd like to tell you relatively briefly how we happened to receive this Torah. Now, before or while I'm talking, you can see the region of Slovakia. Most of you have this handout. So you can see the region of Frýdek Mistek, which was actually two different communities which were, during the war, combined by the Germans into one. This is the community, a very rural community, although now Hyundai has a factory there and all of that. But back then, this is pretty much what you'd see in the shtetl. This was not a big city. This was kind of in the middle of almost nowhere, but not very far from the Polish border. You can learn a little bit about the history of these communities on the second page, Frýdek Mistek. I'm not going to read that. You can see all of that there. But if you take a look at the third page, you're going to see what got this process started, but I'm actually going to go back a little bit farther than that. So Cantor Marcy sang the song before, Ani Ma'amin, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, a song that many, many Jews sang either on the transports to the camps or even in the gas chambers. Jewish history tells of how we're going to turn the darkest days into the brightest. And for that reason, there is a tradition that the Messiah is going to be born on, anybody know what day? Tisha B'Av, okay. On the 9th of Av, the anniversary of the destruction of the temple, the darkest day in Jewish history, a day in which weddings don't take place, a day of mourning and sadness and total denial. That's when the Messiah is going to be born, to change that day from a day of darkness to a day of brightness and light. On Passover, what do we do on Passover? We start from the lowest of the low. We're slaves, and we emerge as free people. And that's a theme we see constantly throughout our history. So what I want to do is I want to go back to a young man who was with his family on his 20th birthday when the Nazis basically come and knock on the door and say, "You're coming with us." And that was Ruthie's father. So he was taken to one of the 6 concentration camps that he ended up going to. And his mother, Ruthie's mother, also was in a concentration camp. And in January 1944, she was in a women's camp known as Langenbilo, where Jacob Birnbaum was working, but he was actually in the men's camp, which was known as Fleckner. And it was a Sunday. And Sunday was a little bit of a looser day. The guards were not quite as strict. They had, as Ruthie's mom used to say, the guards would go out on dates on Sunday. And so the prisoners had a little bit more freedom. And some of the women used to dance and sing to kind of entertain the men across the barbed wire. And Ruthie's father, Jacob, saw Ruthie's mom and her sister singing and dancing. And he said, "If I survive, I'm going to find that woman and I'm going to marry her." He didn't know her at all. And after the war, he found her, and they got married. And it's a great story. She can tell you more. It's really like Fiddler, and she's like, "But I don't love you." "You'll learn to love me. It's okay." Okay. But anyhow, that's the story. It's true. And Ann Landers never accepted it. With all those stories about how we met, she never took it, and I couldn't forgive her for that. But anyhow, move forward in time, and we're in the 1980s. And Ruthie's parents are living in Newton, Massachusetts. They're very involved in a conservative synagogue there and an Orthodox synagogue, and they are going to be putting up a Holocaust memorial at this Orthodox synagogue, Congregation Bethel, right on Commonwealth Avenue. And a decision was made that there should be a Torah as part of this memorial. So given the dimensions of the memorial, which we have and which will be displayed in our lobby, we're going to have another big ceremony on Yom HaShoah, Wednesday evening, May 1st. We will be fixing up and cleaning and doing a little repair with the memorial, and it's going to be out there in the lobby with the Torah. But nonetheless, they needed a small Torah to go into this memorial. And you can see the letter right here in the packets, dated February 11th, 1982, to Ruth Schaffer, who I had contact with as well, saying, "Dear Mrs. Schaffer, as a survivor who lost his entire family in the Holocaust, I must commend you for your work in making available to synagogues Torah scrolls rescued from the Nazis and he's interested in getting a Torah scroll for Congregation Bethel, etc. There are many more letters, but this is one of the ones. And we have a letter then written by the rabbi of the synagogue. I said Newton, I should have said Newton Center. Some people are sensitive to those things. And it's a little hard to read, but you do see in the second paragraph, and it says, as I pointed out, we do not have any kosher scrolls available. If you are interested in having one of the damaged scrolls, I would appreciate you confirming this. So that is how we know that this scroll is not kosher. All right? Now, what does that mean? There are areas of this scroll where the print, the writing is very faded. And there are other parts where perhaps the letters are not connected as well as perhaps they should be. But as Cantor Marcy can attest, we've looked through this Torah, the overwhelming majority of this Torah is, we should all be in such good shape when we're 218 years old, let me tell you. I mean, it's really in wonderful shape. You can see the evaluation. Now, there are 1,564 Torah scrolls. How did we get all these scrolls? Well, the Nazis, they cataloged everything because these were all going into a museum to the extinct Jewish race once all the Jews of the world were massacred. That was the plan. The Nazis were already in America. They were already planning for the North American front once they took care of everything in Europe. Fortunately, things didn't get that far. But nonetheless, everything was cataloged. And so they preserved the Torahs, they preserved a lot of the silver and many other items. And this is the evaluation of the scribe, whose name was Toledano, and he looked at this particular scroll, and it is estimated to have been written in 1800. And you can see it says the condition of the parchment quite good, not very strong in some places, but this is what it was. And so it was cataloged, and it basically had been sitting on a shelf somewhere in a damp synagogue somewhere in Poland until they were all brought to London, England in 1964. And at that point, many of those Torah scrolls were sent around the world, including the large Torah scroll, the Holocaust Torah, which we've had in the Ark probably for 50 years or so, going back way, way before my time. But anyhow, so this Torah scroll was part of this memorial in the Orthodox synagogue in Newton Center, Massachusetts. And given that it was an Orthodox synagogue, and given that they know that this Torah was not kosher, we know for a fact that it never would have been read in that synagogue. We know for a fact that the Jews who lived in this community were taken in 1942 during the High Holy Days to Treblinka and Theresienstadt. And we know, because we have many of the names, and we can look online, and we know that from these communities, Friedeck-Mistek and surrounding areas, just a very, very minuscule number of them survived. So we know that this Torah scroll has not been read in public since 1942. Assuming it was read on the High Holy Days in 1942, that was the last time it was read. So we discovered that it had no longer been part of an active display at the synagogue in Newton Center, Massachusetts. Something else was up there. We weren't aware of that, and we found out about this a little over a year ago. And we began the process of trying to get this Holocaust Torah so that it's not just sitting in a storeroom. But of course, there's a problem, right? Because there's always a problem. What's the problem? Well, we already have a Holocaust Torah. So the question is, well, are you willing to give up the other Holocaust Torah in order to get this Holocaust Torah? And of course, the answer is, well, we really don't want to do that. So enter Ruthie's brother, okay? A fabulous singer, a fabulous dentist if you're ever in the Boston area and you need, okay? But he's also really good with the writing, okay? His son became a very well-known journalist, writing with many publications and interviewed on CNN repeatedly and much, much more. But anyhow, he wrote a letter about the meaning of this particular Torah and what it meant to the family and our congregation and with Ruthie and all. And so the Memorial Scrolls Trust in London made an exception. And so we are part of perhaps less than a dozen congregations in the world which has more than one Holocaust Torah. And so this is it. It's small, it's beautiful, and as I said, It's written in about 1800, and the intention, I believe, we're going to have to talk it over, is that we may use it for certain occasions, and Kristallnacht, I think, being a very appropriate one, but it will ultimately be in the memorial, which will be in the lobby.